contest. A touch wooden, he says, but his lawyerly gravitas makes him the perfect opponent for the PM. And in The Guardian, Zoe Williams says reaction to the impending number 10 baby shows that Boris Johnson is more of a TV celebrity than a politician. Our role as members of the public is just to behold. Well, with me today to look through all of those, Richard Angel, editor at Narrowcast Media Group, and the comedian JoJo Sutherland. Guys, lovely to see you this morning.
Good morning.
Plenty to discuss, so let's dive on in with that Rachel Sylvester piece in The Times, that ministers can't win the war on Whitehall. I mean, that's a bit truistic, isn't it?
Well, reality is, it is true, but it's an important lesson for the government to learn. They need to start learning it early. The sense that they can kind of bully their way through the system as a way to embed their ideas is going to fail. Not least because it looks like this government might have a lot of time on its hands. Boris Johnson's pretty Teflon in the way that he does his politics. And if he doesn't get these things right now, he might be the Prime Minister that makes the problems that he has to deal with further down the track. You see, when governments are in for a long time, by the end of the Thatcher government or the end of the Blair government, actually the problems they were dealing with were ones that they created at the start of their term. Boris might get that all on his watch. And so actually getting this right now really matters. I thought the most important thing that Rachel writes in her piece, though, is one that we should all hear. The role of the civil service is to speak truth to power, and Sir Philip was right to challenge the proposals he believed to be outside the rule of law. What does it come to when the Home Secretary can't hear that something might be illegal?
At the same time, JoJo, I mean, no one who has worked for any amount of time round these parts thinks that the civil service is operating at 100% efficiency. In fact, Rachel Sylvester also says, you know, often described as a Rolls-Royce operation, meant as a compliment, but it's actually the perfect description for a ridiculously expensive and outdated establishment machine. I mean, there's a point there.
There is absolutely a point. And, you know, the idea that, you know, because the government ministers in Whitehall, they don't think that they know what each other is talking about. Do you know what I mean? It's turning into sort of like an episode of Jeeves and Wooster or Yes, Prime Minister. So.
But that is the thing. There is often a tendency to view things through the prism of, you know, what was a work of fiction, Yes, Minister, even though it was Margaret Thatcher's favourite comedy. But if you're going to reshape the civil service, you're going to break a few eggs.
You are going to break a few eggs, but also I think the people that are in civil service are actually people that have been doing this job and are really trained in and have the background and the skills. I mean, government ministers quite often are just jumping from department to department. So, you know, you can't just walk into a job and then tell everybody you know what you're doing.
There is also a difference.
I have tried.
There is also a difference in ministers who lead their department out of crisis, the way John Reid did when he said the Home Office was not fit for purpose, and those who seek to bully it and manipulate it because actually they know they haven't got the strength of their argument on their side. They just have to use the argument of strength. And that seems to be Priti Patel's style.
Guys, take us to Mark Wallace's piece for The Eye this morning. News that we all wanted to read, that 2020 promises a lot more Brexit melodrama.
Well, there's a shocker.
Well, here we hear from a Brexiteer that turns out Brexit isn't going to be as easy as they said in the campaign. And there's going to be some complexities. It turns out that dealing with fishing, when you sell most of it into the EU, is complicated. But when the city's 60 times its share of the economy, when you're sitting around a trade table and you have to trade things off, something's going to go. So it's interesting, but and it's interesting now that there are Leavers who are starting to sound like Remainers. Now those of us that were Remainers have been kind of sidelined as Remoaners and can't be in the debate. It's interesting that people like Mark are stepping up. Because they're having to manage expectations. Because lots of people who were on the Leave side never thought this would come about. They never thought they'd be responsible for the claims they made in that campaign. And now they are. There are some responsible people about. It's a very interesting piece from Mark.
But yes, absolutely. But it's that thing as well. Oh, we didn't realise. Well, no, well, that's the problem. We didn't realise. We don't realise. We still don't realise, you know, the absolute ramifications and all the things. I mean, it's like,
it wasn't always impossible for us to know the outcomes. I mean, we're talking about the behaviour of, you know, officials, government, you know, members of government, you know, in 28 countries around Europe. It was always going to be tricky, and not every outcome could have been anticipated.
No, but it is like having just a knotted ball of wool and trying to unpick it. And, you know, some threads are coming out easier than others. It's...
Also, we're having to be good at something we haven't done for 40 years. The EU are great negotiators. They have got great trade deals with the rest of the world. The British government hasn't done it for 40 years, and we're not actually very good at it, it turns out. And the fear from people is that we're going to get sidelined by the EU and have to just abide by their rules, and then and then Donald Trump's going to come in and say you've got to have chlorinated chicken and access to the NHS.
But I think we all need to calm down because we'll have blue passports. So I think really, let's really consider.
Let's keep talking about those trade negotiations.
They were never blue. Never mind.
Let's keep talking about those trade negotiations. If we look at Blower's cartoon in the Telegraph, I mean, one question that people are asking is if at the end of this process we don't have a trade deal done, which many people are actually suggesting is the government's kind of stated, is the government's ambition in all of this, rather than an FTA just going to no deal in WTO terms. What is our future relationship with the European Union going to look like? We need them as our allies. And, the story that we heard the other day about a battle between Matt Hancock and Number 10 about the early warning system within the EU about, epidemics and pandemics that we're no longer going to be a part of.
Well, the epidemic and the pandemic just shows you there is no border control. Do you know what I mean? It can go anywhere and do anything. So, in terms of our relationship with Europe, I am still quite confident we can all still get along. Am I being sort of naive? But
we all hope so, I think. It should be a sign that they shake hands, because we've got to walk away from this deal having shook hands and agreed on it, we can go forward. The choices of this country are simple. We either have a European-style economy where we share in workers' rights and standards, or we become a kind of Singapore-style economy on the edge. But that is very bad for the rest of the country, because London does the heavy lifting of that Singapore part of the economy, and it basically puts all the rest of the kind of social democratic institutions around the country at risk, because you can't just expect one part of the country to pay for it and everyone's workers' rights to be thrown to one side. So there's a choice, and I hope the government made the right one.
Let's touch briefly on our response to coronavirus. William Hague's thesis in the Telegraph this morning, that we need to build a more resilient economy. Part of the reason that coronavirus could really hit countries like the United Kingdom is our addiction to easy money through debt and low interest rates. What's the thesis here?
I'm not entirely sure how debt has got anything to do with the coronavirus.
This is why I'm asking.
Well, I actually think that the coronavirus is going to kind of expose this government in a way the opposition haven't been able to for 4 years. It's going to show the real shortcomings of underfunding the NHS. The NHS is now not just a health service, it's our security service and it's our economy service, because it is going to be crucial to whether we continue to go to work going forward. It's going to show the fact their failure to deal with 0-hours contracts. If you're an Uber driver and you think you've got the symptoms, do you self-isolate and default on your mortgage or your rent? The consequence of these things are huge. If you're on universal credit and some of the conditions of which you have to meet those is to go to certain appointments, and you think you're ill and you might need to isolate, what do you then do? Do you risk losing your universal credit? Maybe it's time for the government that in this corona period, we have to look at a kind of universal basic income in this time, or something that means that those in the gig economy don't have to choose between defaulting on their mortgage and their family failing, or making somebody ill when they go to work.
But that's the kind of an absolutely excellent point, in as much as, because of, like you say, the gig economy. People are just going to lie. Do you know what I mean?
It's certainly a possibility. We won't, of course, and hopefully we'll have more truth from you next hour. Jojo, Richard, thanks very much indeed. But stick with us here on All Out Politics. A big story coming up next.